and I was brought a big bundle of papers that had been handed in some time before that had been found lying in the police station, and there were statements from long dead policemen, and they related to the Ruxton case. And I looked through them, just glanced through them, and I thought, oh, the Ruxton case, I know all about the Ruxton case. Well, I put them in the bottom drawer. Some years later, I came upon them, so I read them for the first time. There were people and incidents that had been written out of history, and in my view, wrongly so, and I wanted to bring them back. And it's a fabulous story about a domestic murder where the culprit decides, because he's a doctor, that he's going to dismember and disguise the bodies of the two victims and then scatter their body parts all over the central part of Scotland.
Hello, Tom. How are you today?
I'm very well, Simon. I'm very well indeed. How are you?
Are you nervous yet? It's only 5 weeks until our live event in Hillhead Library. 5 weeks today, I think, 25th of August.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm just figuring about how I'm going to get there and how I'm going to travel through Glasgow safely and things like that. But it's all risk, and I'm looking forward to it.
I wouldn't worry about travelling to Glasgow safely. I'd worry about getting out of Glasgow safely again.
Yeah, that's true.
Some of the things you've come away with on here, Tom.
But by that time, the podcast will be done, so that's another challenge.
So somebody said to me the other day, Tom, oh, are you nervous? And my immediate instinct was to say I hadn't thought about it enough to be nervous about it yet. But I remembered an old sergeant, Willie Young, who told me once that you should always be nervous when you go into court. He said, that's a good thing, son. Always worry. If you're not nervous, that's the time to worry. And I'll tell you the truth, Tom, I only ever once went into court not nervous, and it was Dunoon Sheriff Court. And I was in the middle of a detective training course, I think my advanced detective training course. And when you're on a course and in a bubble like that with 23 or 24 like-minded souls, you get a bit cocky, I suppose. And I get cited for Dunoon Sheriff Court for some daft case. I don't know what it was, theft of a car or whatever it was. For the one and only time in my career, I was cocky going into the box. And the reason it's the one and only time is because I nearly got to jail because my attitude was wrong. Do you know what I mean? I can't remember what I was like or what I said or anything. I think it was just my attitude. And the sheriff afterwards had comments made to my boss about it. So that never, ever happened again.
But do you know something? Before last week, I'd have been surprised by that. But when you told me the story of your actions, the scene of the Govan Beast, which we'll hear, I'm now not surprised at that.
Tom, I had to go solo recently without you because you're so busy just now with the World's End book launch and everything that's going on at Small Town Dix with Ruxton, which we'll speak about later. But I had to go solo and speak to David Thredgold, who had me in and looked after me. Hospitality was tremendous over at the Scottish Police Federation office. Have you had a chance to listen to the interview?
I have. In fact, I met David a while ago, and I was very impressed by him. And I think it's good, it's good when things are refreshed. And I think there's a new team at the Federation now, and I think they've got some new thoughts and a new approach. And that heartens me because there's a lot to be done. Yeah. And I'm very encouraged by some of the things they're discussing, which I think is very relevant to those that have come after us.
And I suppose revealing is the fact that he was welcoming to do the podcast. And I think during the course of it said that he would be open to do so anytime because he realises it's all about communication with the rank and file and with the public for that matter. Tom, a couple of the issues that we raised and a couple of them that surprised me. Firstly, we spoke about resources and getting down to the nitty-gritty, the worries that he has and that every police officer, past and present, has just now, that we're losing our presence on the streets for a variety of reasons and the effect that has in so many different, the strengths of in some ways, the roots of the police service and the things that were the foundations, if you like, of our service. Is that uniform presence on the streets. Did you pick that up as well?
Very much so, and I listened with great interest to what he was saying. I think the police officers I speak to, all of them talk about that. And it's evident, just as you drive along the streets, as you go around the town, you just do not see police officers walking on the streets, and you do not see many cars either. Not even traffic cars, to be honest. I think there's been a problem for quite some time, certainly since Police Scotland come in, and that is this whole business about how you do a lot more with a lot less. And there are new jobs coming in all the time, and particularly cybercrime. Huge demand for cyber now, and huge demand for counter-terrorism, for cyber, and for these historical abuse cases, which seem to be growing exponentially and which suck away, dozens and dozens of experienced officers off the street. The trouble is that it's very difficult to backfill that. You know yourself, if you form a squad and you enlarge some specialist investigation, where do people come from? They come from the street. If you have a big march and demonstration, and there's so much now, the environmental protesters and anti-oil and all the rest of it, all of that is sucking people away from the street. And so I think it's a huge problem. And the truth of the matter is, you can't cleave to what went on in days past. That would be like our policing system was very different from the ones of the people that came several generations before. But you still need to have that contact to get that grassroots intelligence. And that's the risk.
And one of the ways that will manifest itself, Tom, is in major crime investigation, because I always remember one of the first actions that was taken was to enrol the beat man, the community man for the patch where it had happened, the guys with the local knowledge and street knowledge that were speaking to shopkeepers, business people, taxi drivers, and just punters on the street. Those cops with their local knowledge were absolutely invaluable in the outset of an investigation and ongoing. I'm thinking off the top of my head here, like murders in the Cranston Hill, where the Chinese community were involved, or over in G Division in Paisley Road West, where it was the Asian community involved. These community cops were absolutely worth their weight in gold and probably crucial to the inquiries that were going on. But just every beat man was important if he's doing his job, obviously. And all he had to do his job was be on the street. That's the truth of the matter, because the public come to him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And of course, that was a system that I started on and you started on. But the truth is that's gone, that there will not be a return to the foot beat patrol system that we knew and grew up with. It simply can't happen. There's no possibility if there'd been resources to do that in the future. And I think they've got to find ways of keeping the contacts with the community in a different way. And that's the challenge. And they must do it, because you do not get the macro criminal intelligence without getting the micro. It simply doesn't work. This is the thing about recorded crime. I'm a little bit skeptical about this business about crimes coming down and down. Reported crime is coming down and down, but that's not necessarily the same thing. If you make it difficult for people to report matters to the police, either they've got to hang on the phone for 30 minutes trying to get through to a call centre, whatever, they'll simply give up. And in fact, I was speaking to a young detective there who's the son of a friend of mine, and he was saying that quite often when they do start to investigate a crime in an area, they find that there's dozens and dozens more, but which just haven't been reported, or that reporting has been made too difficult for them. And I think that spreads across a lot of places. That's the same with getting a dental appointment or a doctor's appointment. It's been made too difficult, and it puts a lot of people off.
Post office, banks, all of these things have been made harder and harder. And I'm thinking police stations that are closing. I heard the other day that Gorbals is closed in Glasgow. These places were community hubs, in a way. Do you ever watch Scott Squad, Tom?
I do.
I thought you did. I thought you might. Some of the things you come out with, I think you're straight out at Scott Squad. But
Well, I'm a script writer for Scott Squad.
Karen on the uniform bar and the guy with the glasses that comes in all the time. And that just rings so true of bar officers that I knew throughout the force here through in Strathclyde.
Officer Karen is everybody who's had a connection with the police has met her.
Yeah, and the guy, I can't remember his name with the glasses, the lad that comes in and annoys her all the time.
That's right, yeah. A sort of police groupie. There's always one of them going around, that's right.
Yeah. And we're doing away with a lot of them, a lot of police properties being sold off and closed up, right in the heart of these communities.
The problem was that when Police Scotland was formed, it inherited a lot of, frankly, semi-derelict property all over Scotland that had not been properly maintained for some years before that, and was also in the wrong place. And I was speaking to one of the senior officers in Edinburgh about the closure of our old West End police station, which was out at the West End and was a busy station. And I said to him, I can't believe you're closing the West End. And he said, do you know what the footfall there is now? And I said, no. He said, we're lucky if we get half a dozen people a week coming into the public counter.
Wow.
Now that just shows you the change in behaviour of people.
Yeah.
That they're not walking about, they're not going to police stations to report things. They're doing so online or they're doing so on the telephone. So it's very hard to justify keeping a place open 24 hours a day with people sitting there if nobody's coming to the counter.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin, as usual. I heard Paisley's closing as well, Mill Street in Paisley. The other thing that David Thredgold was talking about, Tom, and it's along the same vein, and it shocked me at the time, but since then it's been reinforced, everyone I've spoke to that's serving just now, is the amount of police resource that's tied up primarily dealing with mental health problems that are fobbed off from the NHS and other establishments. And cars and officers are tied up, sometimes for their whole shift. And the figure that he put on it, having done some research into it, both independently and the Federation themselves, was around 60% of resources tied up in these issues. And that's a big part of the problem, obviously.
Yeah, and that's been building for a long number of years. Ever since the care in the community, which came in a long time ago now, 10, 15 years ago, the whole notion of care in the community was, in my view, a scam. It was an excuse to close down mental hospitals and places where people suffering from mental illness could be looked after. And the theory was that they should be cared for within the community, but the trouble is there was no resources transferred to the community to care for them. So it was simply a cost-cutting exercise. And since then, the problem has grown and grown. And one of the big issues, and I have a very good friend who is a very senior mental health nurse, and she was saying that when you look at the cohort of patients that are coming in now, some of them quite seriously disturbed. One of the common factors, and this is something we can talk about in a different program, is they have a history of drug use. Not necessarily immediately at the time, but way back in their background, they've got a history of drug use. And eventually, there is a price to pay for that. And one of the areas that interests me is this business of cannabis, strong cannabis psychosis, and its association with serious mental illness. When I left the police, I did a couple of, in fact, I did more than that. I did a few homicide reviews down in the north of England. Some of them cold case, some of them domestic homicide reviews. And it was these were people who had basically killed members of their family. One of them was a young man who had come back from London for the Christmas break to live with his grandmother and his father, who had brought him up. And little did they know that he had developed a very strong cannabis habit when he was in London, and he had a psychotic episode and murdered them both. And I actually met him. I went to interview him in prison, and he was quite sane and logical, and he said he didn't know what had come on him, he was paranoid, he thought they were out to get him, he was going to be killed and all that stuff. And it was all to do with his strong cannabis use. And these things are all building, and there's more and more people needing mental health help, and there's fewer and fewer resources. Again, the same lady, the mental health nurse, said to me that if a young person reports to their GP that they need some mental health intervention, the waiting time in this part of the world is 2 years. That's for CAMS, the Children and Young Persons Mental Health Services. It's 2 years. That's useless. Absolutely useless.
And that's dealing with the known conditions and reports and run-of-the-mill, if you like, people looking for help, the first cries for help. But what we're talking about with the police is when people get into crisis, when they get into situations like you referred to there with the horrible murder down south, that's when things need dealt with there and then. And there is nobody other than the police that are going to do that. And that's the gaps that we are filling just now. I say we, as the police are filling just now across the country, that's sucking in all those resources. Just a wee comment on your cannabis analogy there, or story there. It's absolutely crucial that we take control of this marketplace for all the reasons that you say there, and have proper regulation in place so that we know exactly what substances we're putting into the marketplace and who we're putting them into. And rather than leaving it as it is just now because obviously criminals want to sell the most expensive product that they've got, and I don't think they give a hoot about the strength of it or what the effects of it are going to be on their clientele. And I think that's where we need to get some control of the marketplace. But we refer to this regularly, and we definitely will come back to it again. Yeah. I just wanted to finish off with the David Thredgold there. Tom, just an overview. I was refreshed speaking to David and to his colleague and some of the conversations that we had off the podcast as well. Do you feel the same optimism, and that things are changing drastically, but there's enough people there that know what's going on and know how to deal with it, that we can muddle through and reinvent the police force? Because that seems to be what's going on just now.
Yes, I do feel optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Because I think there's certain areas of Police Scotland just now that have never been in better fettle. And particularly the area that we were both involved in, major crime, they've never had better resources. They've never been better organised, and they've never had better people. And when I think, and I've just finished writing a book about the World's End murders, which I was involved in, the first 24 hours of that case for me, my job, was a desperate struggle to find people, cars, offices, kit, and set it all up. Now, I don't think we missed much in the first 24 hours as it so happened, but we might have done. Think what it's like now. Coming back to Fettes when I was there the other week there, the old force control room is now an incident room, all set up and ready to go. Just come in, switch on the light, and it's all ready to go. Everything. All sitting there, ready to go. And there's a major investigation team who are also all primed and ready to go and experienced, just ready to hit the ground running. So much better than the guddle that we had. So much better.
I'm laughing at the guddle, Tom. I remember going to a murder in Dumbarton. I was in the squad, and we arrived. Sergeant Bob Barrowman was my DS, and there was a team, maybe 4 or 5 of us had arrived. And I think this would be the second, possibly the third day. Adam Hay was the DCI down there. I don't know if you knew Adam. And this is the third day of the inquiry. And we walked in, and all the Holmes system house-to-house paperwork was lying on a table. And whoever had brought it out had emptied it, and obviously had a scrummage through it and left all the paperwork lying disorganised and walked away and didn't, because nobody knew what to do with it. And the reason I'm laughing is because Barrowman turned round to me in his normal style out the side of his mouth and said, "McLean, take all these papers and put them in the appropriate order and get things started. We're off for a coffee." And they all went for a coffee and left me to sort out the house to house. But that's exactly the guddle that you're talking about, that we were met with at every major crime, because it was usually a different office that you were in who hadn't done it before, had to go and search for the box with the Holmes paperwork in it or whatever it might be.
But it was things like, there was things like getting cars, managing to get enough cars. We needed cars to go down to East Lothian, needed cars for the city inquiry, getting cars. So you got the car, you got the key to the car. Where was the damn car? It parked somewhere miles away. And then when you got into the car, you find there's no petrol in it, and there's an old fish supper lying in the passenger seat. You know, and on it goes. And it was just all these little obstacles. Police Scotland is losing a tremendous number of experienced people at the moment. And I'm talking about people, sergeant, inspector level, senior cops going. And it's easy to say, okay, we've lost 200 men or 200 officers this year, but we've recruited 200 officers. But you and I both know that it takes a long time for that new recruit to be worth a damn, frankly.
Yeah.
To get up to speed, certainly. It takes a long time and a lot of training. And the question then is, who's doing the training? And is there anybody there to do? I'm not talking about Telly Allen now. I'm talking about the street training. You talked about optimism. I'll tell you what I've always thought, a tremendous thing that Scottish Police Service has going for it, and that is Tully Allen. Because uniquely, every police officer in Scotland who's joined since 1960 has all got that in common. We all went through Tully Allen. So we've all got some sort of common ownership, some sort of common thread that brings us all together. Different forces, different badges, different attitudes, different cultures. But in the final analysis, we all started as cops, and we all started marching up and down that damn parade square at Tully Allen.
Back to the civilian that I spoke to during the week, Tom, and she told me, I said to her about experienced cops, I asked her about the shift, how the shift is made up of age and demographic. And she said, Simon, a lot of probationers now are being taught and tutored by probationers. So that tells you the demographic of because of that dearth of senior cops that you're talking about. That we've got shifts going out, maybe 8 or 10 men, and more than half of them are probationers. And that's a shame. It's a shame for the probationers, Tom. It's a shame for the young cops coming through, because they're getting thrown in at the deep end. And we have a big attrition rate just now as well, with cops not lasting and getting out of probation. They're going and finding other things to do. And that's possibly part of the reason.
We've discussed this before, and not everybody is cut out to be a police officer. It's not a job, it's a way of life. And you've got to have a touch for it and a feel for it. But one of the other things that's happened, I think, since the pandemic, is working conditions have changed. I'm doing some work just now with some museums in Scotland, in Edinburgh, to set up an exhibition next year. And I'm dealing with some very nice people and some very good people, obviously, but they only work 3 days a week, or 2 days a week. And quite a lot of them have got a facility to work from home. If you're a police officer, rotating shifts and being called out on a Saturday, it'd be easy for you to look across at these folk and say, their working conditions are a lot better than mine, and actually drift away to these other jobs.
So there's lots of reasons, and I'm sure we'll return to many of them. We've had a great response to the David Thredgold interview already, mostly from cops. So we seem to have stirred something up there that maybe we'll tap into moving forward, Tom. The other thing I wanted to speak to you about today was your big, not debut, because you've been on Small Town Dick's podcast, the American podcast, numerous times, half a dozen times or more over the years. They've taken up your Ruxton case as a special project, it seems, and launched on Friday. I was going to ask you we'll come to Ruxton in a minute or two. How did that association with Small Town Dick's come up, Tom?
It was a few years ago. I can't remember the actual date. It must have been about 2018, 2019. I got a call out of the blue from someone in the Retired Officers Association locally who said that there was an American podcast company wanting to speak to me because they'd seen my name in relation to, I think it was The World's End, actually, when I think about it. Anyway, they wanted to speak to me, but they didn't know how to contact me. And we don't know, I get quite a few media contacts. Anyway, I emailed these people and said, happy to speak to you. What's your interest? And that started a conversation. And then we had some phone calls and a Zoom call. And I found them just an engaging and charming group of people who, as always, I think I may have told you that I actually worked in America for a while. I worked with the FBI for a while, Simon. I don't know if I mentioned it before. Maybe
the FBI? What does that stand for?
Federal Bureau of Investigation, Simon. I'll tell you about it sometime.
I'm sure you will.
It's maybe material for a separate podcast. I don't know. Anyway, I
Tom,
was used to them.
see if we just take all the clips. If we get our producer Chris to take all the clips of the bits you've told us about the FBI, that'll be a season in its own. So don't worry about doing anything fresh.
We could do that in Paul McCartney. How about
that? If only Paul McCartney had some connection with the FBI, would be on a
I'm sure he does. We can find one. Let's make one up.
Tom, see with the Small Town Dicks, were you a Simpsons fan?
The Simpsons.
Because I think you've modelled yourself on, I don't know if you know the Simpsons, but I could think of a couple of characters in there that, just like Scott Squad.
Do you think I'm Bart? Do you know? Or Homer? I don't know. No, I'd watched The Simpsons. But anyway, and of course what you're referring to is the fact that one of the leading lights in Small Town Dicks is Yardley Smith. And Yardley, she's known as the voice of The Simpsons, but actually Yardley has a huge hinterland in show business. Very well known in the show business world. And if you meet anybody who's at all connected with film or television and mention the name Yardley Smith, they'll say, oh yeah. And it's not all about The Simpsons, because she's been involved in a whole lot of other things. Yes. So anyway, one thing led to another, and I did several shows with them. I did The World's End, I did some other ones. And then I said, I've actually just brought together this book about this famous Ruxton case. So I actually spoke about it too. I did an episode with them. And at the end of the episode, they said, there's so much in this case. And I said, yeah. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send across to you a couple of copies of my book, which I did. And they came back to me and said, look, we're fascinated by this, and we think there's so much in it that we'd like to take up the option for the book, for podcast, and hopefully for film and television, because we'd like to make a series of it. And so this series, which is called Beyond Recognition, just being aired on Small Town Dicks, first episode was last week, is the product of that. And it, can I say, and not because I'm on it, but it's a super production of the highest quality, and I'm absolutely delighted with it. And Yardley Smith is narrating it. She's the storyteller. She's absolutely tremendous.
She's first class, isn't she? She just creates that perfect atmosphere for it. She's just brilliant. When I spoke to her, I did a couple of stories with them as well, one of which has been on the Small Town Dick series. And Yardley, I used to, there was a lawyer that I used to be friends with. He died a couple of years ago now. And I used to say he had a fantastic bedside manner. Does that make sense? And that's what Yardley reminds me of. It doesn't matter who she's speaking to. She makes you feel as though you're the most important person in the world at that particular time. She's very good.
They're very successful, Simon, and I think we've got things to learn from them. They're obviously a big budget outfit.
Yeah.
And they're not struggling along on 3 and 6 a week like we are. But they've got a loyal following of people now across the world. They've created this community, almost like a family, and they speak to them like that. There's Yardley, there's Dan and Dave. There are 2 ex-detectives. There's a guy called Paul Holes, who is a criminal psychologist, a very experienced individual who's been involved in a lot of very famous cases in the United States. Yeah, they're a great outfit, and I thoroughly enjoy working with them. And I've thoroughly enjoyed working with them on the Ruxton case. And so far, of the episodes I've heard, and I'm confident they've made a super job, and I thoroughly recommend it.
This will probably be removed from the final edit, but at the start of it, I was laughing when I heard Yardley. It might have been at the end when she rhymes off the thank yous to the technical team behind the episode. There's more people involved in producing that than will listen to Crime Time Inc., I think. And all we've got is that one poor guy. Slightly overworked. Poor Chris.
You know something, you're absolutely right, and that struck me too. What struck me about that, actually, I think that we do pretty well, because that is a big budget, all singing, all dancing set up at Small Town Dicks, and you can hear that it's very good quality in terms of their production values and everything else. And I'm very pleased that my book was chosen by them, and I'm delighted by that, and I'll be delighted if it goes on to film or television. Great. But actually, it also reflects on the fact that, considering we are one man in a Doug, and sometimes the Doug's not there, we do pretty well.
So tell us a bit about Ruxton then, because some people will be listening to this and thinking, Ruxton, who's Ruxton? What's that? What's that about? Give us a wee overview, if you will. Obviously, we don't want to preempt the 6 episodes that are coming. We've had 1 episode so far. Tell us a bit about Ruxton, and tell us how Ruxton came about for you, because obviously even 1935 was a bit early for your service, a few years. You missed it by a couple of years.
The first time I heard about the Ruxton case was actually from my mother. My mother was a teenager in 1935, and she knew all about the Ruxton case, and it was the sensation of the age. It was, the newspapers were all powerful at that time, and as I told them on the broadcast, there were half a dozen newspapers in the UK that sold 1 million copies a day. Now, you remember that there was radio, but there was no television, and so the only way that people got information was the newspapers. And they were not tabloid newspapers. They were broadsheet newspapers, and with dense text, with a whole story. You could look at court proceedings, and it's not just 3 or 4 lines, a man was found guilty. There'd be columns and columns about what happened in a particular case. And it was also the time when they refer to it as the golden age of crime fiction. And I'm referring to Agatha Christie. It was at the time when Agatha Christie was at her height, and people were fascinated by Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple and all the rest of it. So that's the time span we're in. And I knew about the Ruxton case because it was a famous forensic case, and we were taught about it at detective training. And later on, when I was at university, we were taught about the Ruxton case in terms of forensics. So I thought I knew all about the Ruxton case. And then, be about the year 2000, I suppose, I was the deputy chief at Lothian Borders, and I was brought a big bundle of papers that had been handed in some time before, that had been found lying in the police station. And it was a big file of old foolscap paper with statements on it. And there were statements from long dead policemen, and they related to the Ruxton case. And I looked through them, just glanced through them, and I thought, the Ruxton case, I know all about the Ruxton case. Well, I put them in my bottom drawer. I've always been interested in the history of crime and historical issue, so I put them in the bottom drawer, and I forgot about them until some years later I came upon them. So I read them for the first time.
Tom, that's great to know that even the deputy chief had a bottom drawer where all the junk gets thrown in. I thought it was just DOs that had that bottom drawer, but it's good to know you had one as well.
I had a huge bottom drawer. To think that my bottom drawer was so big it went down to the floor below. But so I started to read this and realised that I actually hadn't known about the Ruxton case at all. There was other areas that had not been explored. And I don't want to spoil the podcast, but suffice to say that there were people and incidents that had been written out of history, and in my view, wrongly so. And I wanted to bring them back. And I felt a real sense of duty, in a way, funny way, that this was wrong, that these people had been forgotten about. And I wanted to tell their story, so I set out to tell the story. And it's a fabulous story about a domestic murder where the culprit decides, because he's a doctor, that he's going to dismember and disguise the bodies of the 2 victims and then scatter their body parts all over the central part of Scotland. And it's about a remarkable police case, a fantastic crime scene management by a local sergeant who had absolutely no reason to be able to do that kind of work. I've met his grandson, and I've read his papers, and I've read the original statement that he put in on the day it happened. This was September 1935. And you say to yourself, if he had done this now, with all that we know and with all the specialised equipment and everything, it would be a first-class job. To have done it then was nothing short of remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. What comes through it all, the detectives, the scientists, the lawyers, cops, they all had one thing in common. They had every one of them, had experienced extreme hardship during the First World War. They'd all been in active service, they'd all been in the Western Front, and they were a special breed of people. They were tougher. They were far tougher. I'm sure they were far tougher than we are because of what they'd survived. I think that's what brought them together. There was no grandstanding. There was no turf wars. There was no territorial niceties. The scientists, Glasgow police were hugely helpful, the senior detectives from Glasgow. The scientists from Edinburgh University, Glasgow University, Edinburgh Identification Branch, they all pulled together seamlessly in a way that, frankly, we didn't do in the 1970s. It was absolutely remarkable.
Yes.
And I'm sure the reason for that was because they all had this common shared experience of the First World War, and they had survived, and they had a sense of, you can see it in what they're doing and how they're working. They all had this sense of purpose, which drove them on. So it's a great story. And of course, it was a groundbreaking case. Several branches of forensic science were developed as a consequence of it, etc.
We'll not preempt the next 5 episodes. I listened to the first one on Friday, and my hero right away was Sergeant Sloan, because just his attitude, not just at the locus there, as you see, his crime scene management and whatnot, his record keeping, things that he had never been, he just did it intuitively because he sensed what needed to be done and the gravity of it. He immediately grasped the gravity of what he was dealing with, but throughout the inquiry, his input was crucial as well. And I loved the way he just stayed in the background and kept plugging away. But we'll hear all that as we go on. It too has had a lot of traction with our audience, Tom. People asking me about it. And I think people becoming Patreons of Small Town Dicks just so that they can hear the whole. A lot of people like to digest things in a winner now. They don't like, we bring these podcasts out every week. And I think that's because that's the way we used to see things, and things were shown on television every week, every Tuesday between 7 and 8 or whatever it was. But there's a growing trend now that people want to see the whole thing in a winner, if you like, or listen to the whole thing in a winner. So we'll see how that evolves in coming weeks.
Yeah, and of course the book has done very well. They are very pleased. It's been shortlisted for the National Book Awards. Ringwood Publications, Ruxton, The First Modern Murder. It's a great story, and it's an enduring story. Because at the end of the day, what it's about, people working together, and it's about a triumph of the human spirit. It's about Sloan there, plugging away. No CID experience, nothing, but he is a guy with a purpose. And this crime has taken place on his patch, and he's going to solve it.
Yeah, yeah. Tom, I know that you were down in Moffat last year. You went down there and did some talks down there. Mm-hmm. Tell us a wee bit about the museum down there and what happens in Moffat that people might be interested in.
There's a lovely little museum. Moffat's a lovely little town off the A74 there. It's a beautiful wee market town, old farming town. And they've got a nice wee local museum, which is run by volunteers, and it's absolutely super. And last year they had a special exhibition on the Ruxton case, and they managed to borrow a whole lot of materials from Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary, the old Dumfriesshire, who still hold some of the artefacts, and various other places. And they've still got a mini exhibition on the Ruxton case. And the museum's really nice. It's well worth a visit. And frankly, well worth supporting as well, because these small museums are under a lot of threat.
Have you been at the Locust, Tom, a couple of miles from Moffat?
Yes, I've been all over the place. I've been at the Locust. I've been down in Lancaster, where the murders took place.
Okay, we'll come back to that in future episodes as it unfolds with Small Town Dicks, but thanks for sharing that with us, Tom. I suppose the final thing today I wanted to chat with you about, we're getting so busy here at Crime Time Inc. that we've got lots of things going on. Not more so than 5 weeks today when we do our live show at the Hillhead Library, and a week later on the 2nd of September when you do the Edinburgh East Coast launch of The World's End Murders, the new World's End Murders books. You looking forward to all of that?
I am. I'm looking forward to the 25th, and I'm looking forward to the 2nd. The tickets for both these events are free. You can get tickets for the 25th of August on our website, and for the 2nd of September, it's going to be held at the Royal Scots Club in Abercrombie Place. 2 free shows. I'm hopeful they'll be good and they'll be entertaining. I'm looking forward to them both.
I think we'll get them both on our website, Tom, and that gives people easy access to it. That's crimetimeinc.com, where they can also leave us a message. They can interact with us on there, which seems to be happening more and more now. We always welcome comments, whether they're positive or constructive criticism, whatever, or some ideas about what people would like us to chat about, what guests they would like to have on, or indeed if anybody would like to be a guest and come on and tell us their story about real crime. Okay, I'm looking forward to all of that, Tom, and I'm looking forward to all the interesting stuff we've got lined up as we wind up season 2 over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Good, we'll speak soon.
That's great, Simon. You take care, and nice to talk to you again.
Thanks, Tom. Tom, 25th of August. Not far away now. You're coming through to Glasgow. What's going on? How can I get involved?
That's right, Simon. Sunday, the 25th of August at 2 o'clock, Hillhead Library. It's a live Crime Time Inc. podcast. How to get there? Our website, crimetimeinc.com, and you'll get tickets, and it's free.
Fantastic. And it's going fast, Tom, I can assure you of that. Can't wait. See you there.